Assalamu alaikum, this is Khaleel Mohammed. Today's the day we're going to be talking about Ertugrul, that TV series that seemed to have swept the entire world by storm, and it seems to be very popular. I did some research before we had this little talk, and there's so many people from all walks of life, Muslim and non-Muslim, that absolutely love that show. I have a special guest with me today, Humera Khan. Assalamu alaikum. And we're going to be discussing the TV series Ertugrul here on Wagwan!
Hi, this is almost. Stay tuned for Wagwan!
Alrighty then, guys and gals, here we go. Right, so Humera, of course, assalamu alaikum again. You are one of the biggest advocates for this TV series. Because I've seen you online on Facebook talking about it in glowing terms.
Yes.
And I've never seen it. And I confess, 3 times now, 3 times I've tried to watch it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm lazy, maybe I'm sport, but because of the speed of the subtitles, I've just not been able to get into it.
Yes.
But I keep hearing rave reviews about it. I thought this sounds amazing. It's, you know, it's inspiring. It's good role models. All these things, whether they're true or not, I don't know. We're going to find out from you today, inshallah. So I've got a few questions for you here. You're going to be grilled, sort of.
All right.
The first simple question is, what is so amazing about this TV show? I mean, it's a TV show that people talk about, but what is the essence of it that makes it so amazing?
Well, when I first started watching it, it was a little bit down the line. Or people were already talking about it, and I just kept putting off, and then I just said, okay, let me just try watching it. Then I watched episode 1, and then that was it. And then it was like binge watching until I finished it, and it was just like you suddenly find that you're, you know, transported into another world with things that, you know, really inspires you, motivates you, and gives you something to think about for the future.
Okay. I mean, if it's inspiring you, then does that mean that there are positive role models in it? Because what I want to talk about quickly, getting right into it, is the role of women. Because as I said, when I was doing some research for the show, somebody talked about the role of women within this TV show. So what is your take, or what is your feeling on how they portray women in the show?
Well, what is so amazing about this nomadic tribal group, basically, is the way that they show the integration of men and women, the way they show that, you know, in this very simplistic life, the contribution of both are really important. In our mind today, we may say it's a bit stereotyped. The men are doing maybe the governance and the hunting and the business side, and women are doing the...
Are they very macho men? Are they?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, they are. Maybe they're warriors. They have to be.
Okay.
But you know, but the women are also very... you know, integrated into that system, and their contribution valued. They are the ones who are making the produce, after all, that they go and sell. They have a significant economic contribution towards the well-being of the tent, of the tribe and everything. And they are, of course, also homemakers and all that kind of stuff. And their contribution, their perspectives is valid. The lead males speak to the women, they talk to the women, they negotiate. What the women say matters. And there's a spectrum of kind of women reflected in the series. I mean, we don't want a stereotype to say that a Muslim woman can only be sort of some kind of perfection, but it shows the sort of plotting one, or the fierce one, or the very sublime one, or the very one who has presence and governance, and it shows a whole range of different kind of characters which we normally don't see in a Muslim.
Well, I was going to say that because there are a few even Hollywood films with big budgets that have made films regarding and involving Muslims, and the one I'm thinking of is Kingdom of Heaven with Liam Neeson, and it was pretty one-sided. I know the person who made it was Ridley Scott, but he didn't do the non-Muslim side any favors. He showed them to be quite dark and the Muslims to be quite upright and noble. And I felt it's good that he's doing that to try and tip that balance. But at the same time, you know, human beings, we all have our foibles, we all have our ups and downs. And as a community, Muslims, you know, we're not devoid of those pitfalls.
But as far as 13th Warrior is concerned, I think maybe in its context, it needed to, so much of the opposite had been seen. Maybe it needed to make the point
Kingdom of
about
Heaven.
the Kingdom
of
Heaven.
Kingdom That's
of
a good
Heaven.
film though, 13th Warrior.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Antonio Banderas. Go check it out if you haven't seen it, I'm telling you.
Yeah, Kingdom of Heaven, maybe it needed to have that sort of emphasis on the other side. But I think what you find in Ertugrul is that there are villains, from different, like the Crusaders or Templars or the Mongols, but also the villains are also internal. In fact, the worst villains are the internal villains. And there are many points where both the Mongols and the Christians say, look, you know, we don't have to worry about the Muslims or the Turks, because they're more bothered about killing each other than they are about killing us, basically. Which, you know, which was such a profound statement when I heard it. And I thought, absolutely true. It's true then and true now.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. All righty then. Okay. All right. We talked about the portrayal of women and like the good and bad side of Muslims characters in it. Do you think that a non-Muslim would be able to appreciate it? Because I heard so many glowing reviews, mainly from Muslims, a few from non-Muslims, but is it something that a non-Muslim could look at and still be entertained, learn something, and maybe get an insight into the Muslim community, or if not the Muslim community today, the Muslim community back in the olden days?
Well, you know, if you follow the fan pages, and I'm on maybe 4 or 5
Are you?
of them, yes.
I think I picked the right person.
And if you follow them, you'd be amazed the amount of non-Muslims who watch it and who love it. And what they say, I've not heard anything negative about it from them. And what they tend to say is, well, this is, you know, I've never seen Islam or Muslims presented in this way. And they really love the production. They even love it. There's no gratuitous sex and violence. And they say they can just watch it and relax and watch it with their family. Their families are engaged with it, you know, and they ask lots of questions on the various fan pages. So, like, okay, why does this happen and why does that happen, and you know, and why do Muslims, you know, when they pray, why do they do something else? So they're asking a lot of these really sort of simple questions almost, but they don't have the space anywhere else to ask it. Right, so it creates a really important dialogue between people. So is it a dawah tool, so to speak? Well, not in the traditional sense, but you know, the non-traditional sense maybe. Okay. Now I mentioned as well that a lot of people have said that Ibn Arabi is in it, because we all know from the Muslim history that he's a very famous scholar. Yes. Is this correct? And what role does he play? Well, he plays the sort of, in the early series, he has this role where he provides the spiritual sort of framework for the growth of Ertugrul. As he goes from being, like right in the beginning, he says to his brother, you know, you're for the headquarters, I'm for the hunt. Meaning that he wasn't interested in leadership of that type. He was one who was going out and do the hunting and the warrior, and he wasn't interested in that kind of role. So therefore, what you see then, things emerge in the storyline where he's pushed into having to take a leadership role, not of his own seeking, but he's put into that situation. And Ibn Arabi, in a sense, is the person who nurtures his spiritual growth within that. And we see so many really, really beautiful Islamic principles, ethics, storylines, you know, learning tools, not in a patronizing way, but in a way that you sit and think, oh I can see that for myself. Yeah, so it's believable, is it? It's so believable. And you know, it's the way his character is presented is, he's the sheikh that you're looking for. Okay. Right? I mean, I know it's a TV program, and you know, some people say, oh, but it's not true to history, it's not this, that, the other. But it's not the point. Nobody, we all know that it's not exactly history. And it says in the beginning of every program, this is inspired by their history, right? So therefore, they had taken some licenses with the history, but it's broadly speaking following within the framework of that history and traditions. You know, it's made most of us who watch it, who actually didn't know anything about this history, go and do some reading about it, right? I didn't know much about that history, and I've read and I've learned and I've found out a lot. You know, I know it's a TV program. I'm not stupid. But, you know, but it's inspired the motivation to know more, because growing up in the West, we don't have access to this information. We don't know about it. Right? Or we're not pushed in that direction. There's nothing sort of dragging us towards it. Or, you know, sort of. And alhamdulillah, even on the internet, there's some really interesting, you know, stuff about it that you can find, and you can, you know, form your opinions. Okay. Right then, guys, we're going to stop right there. We're going to come back for part 2 of Wagwan just in a minute.
Stay tuned to Wagwan.
I did a review for Bilal, a new breed of hero, and you know, it was her, but the reason I'm saying that is because, similar to the message, there are moments in the film that you just feel, whoa, you know, hair-raising moments. You feel, yes, this is, and you feel, oh, tears are welling up in my eyes. Yes. Are there any moments like that in this TV show? So many.
as a Muslim, I can only speak for myself, as a Muslim who feels battered and bruised all the time, misunderstood, misrepresented. When I first started watching it, actually, I was at a really low ebb as far as working in the community was concerned, the broader issues. I was feeling, well, what's the point? Why do we do these things? Because there was just blockages. And after watching it, it completely turned things around for me, and I got completely inspired by it. I found my belief back again, because I was losing it, I think. And I felt, yes, there is a higher goal. There is something. It's part of the course for us to face some of these challenges. But this gave you a framework to consider, to be stronger, to say, yeah, okay, that does happen like that. I mean, so many discussions on the Facebook pages about how our internal problems are far harder than our external ones, and how so many people stab you in the back, and so many vested interested, and all that kind of stuff, you know. And how does an Islamic civilization, which has so much based on ethics and principles, how does it then turn into despotic leaders and decadence and all that? So there's lots of things to think about and reflect on. Okay,
cool. I know you don't watch it, Game of Thrones, but there's been a lot of comparisons to it. One of the reviews online said there is a Muslim Game of Thrones, and if you have seen Game of Thrones, it is exciting. It's very realistic. It's very engaging, and I'm hooked on it. I'm looking for season 6, the last season, to come out next year sometime. But it does have the usual pitfalls. It's a lot of unnecessary, gratuitous sex scenes, which are just totally thrown in there for pure titillation, for no reason. How close, or would you say, in that sense, is the TV show Ertugrul? Is it like that? Does it have saucy scenes?
Absolutely not. And and in fact, what people are also saying, even the non-Muslims are saying it, they're so happy that it doesn't happen. And it's not necessary. You can focus on the storyline, right? You don't need to be titillated in that way in order for a good story to have an impact. And even the sort of violent scenes that they have when they're sort of killing people and whatever, they fudge it out a little bit. Okay, right? Is there blood? Is there any sign of blood? I mean, some of it has a little bit, like when they're doing a beheading or something like that. You can't hide everything, but it's done in a way that is not gratuitous, and you can ignore it, and all that kind of stuff. It's not the focus. I mean, these were rough times. These were times of violence, right? And people, when they fought each other, they fought with aggression. So therefore, face-to-face combat kind of thing. So therefore, you can't totally get rid of all of that. But I think, my interest wasn't the fighting scenes, right? So therefore, and I know a lot of people who do watch it like the fighting scenes in it. But for me, it's more about the historical framework, the relationship between men and women, and the Islamic sort of essence of it. And I would just add that one of the things that I really loved about it is that how it showed the times in which they were living, because a lot of our historical stuff we read about today is actually based in that period of history, right? But we don't understand the context of it at all. So we read those things and we project our modern day thinking on it. But in Ertugrul, by the way that they've presented, and they've done a really good job of the way they've shown the tents and the tribes and the other places and everything, that you say, okay, it was a different time. I understand tribal life a little bit more. How the tribes then would make alliances or break alliances, and how the state and how it had a relationship with these nomadic groups, and it gave you a lot to visually look at and say, okay, that's what it was like. That's why I can't understand it today, because I don't live that kind of life, right? And so to understand it differently, because they didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water, they didn't have a police system, they didn't have security, they didn't have anything like that. So of course you were constantly protecting your tribe and protecting your borders, because you have to be safe. Why is it that women can't then go out? Why are women protected? So because it's not safe. It's not safe to do that, right? Although some of the women were very strong and did lots of things that we wouldn't even think about doing today. But you would imagine that the safety for both men and women is paramount, right? So therefore, you can understand a little bit why some of those paranoias which were relevant in those times, we actually continue today with the mindset of 13th century rather than with the 21st century.
Yeah, I see. What you're saying reminds me of two books I read by Amin Malouf. He wrote Samarkand and Leo the African.
Right.
And he talks about those times. He talks about Andalus and he talks about obviously Leo the African as well. But what I found fascinating about those books is that he describes their day-to-day living, the food, you know, the clothing, the hierarchy in the society, what people thought, how superstitious they were. And it really grounds you in it. And I think a lot of time when we read history, we decontextualize it and try and, like you said, try and take those understandings and try and graft it on today's, you know, sensibilities, and it just doesn't work. And we forget that there's a context to how people were then, and it's hugely, vastly different to what we experience today. And I think that disconnect is a problem. That,
and I say this mainly on the issue to do with gender as well. It was a different way of understanding gender, and we can't, you know, we can understand it and how it's represented in history, but it's different now. You know, it's a different, we are not that kind of tribal, patriarchal society today, particularly in the big cities, right? It may be still in other places, but we are mainly urban people these days. So we have to see, what does this mean for us today in the kind of economic structures people operate in and the kind of lifestyles people live, the houses that they're living in. Those same rules don't apply any longer, right? So therefore we are not living, generally speaking, in these functioning extended families. Usually they're dysfunctional. So therefore, you know, but in those days, you had to follow certain rules rigorously. Otherwise you destroyed yourself, you destroyed the tent, you would kill yourself, right? So you had to be very rigid about those things because for your safety. But today's different now, right? So therefore, you know, how can we reinterpret what are the important principles that are either faith-based or culturally based or whatever, and how do we then understand them and contextualize them for the time that we live in?
Absolutely awesome. A lot of people, of course, Muslims, I'm talking about Muslims in particular at the moment, they like it because what I mentioned before about the hair-raising, inspiring moments. But in terms of Islam itself, I don't want to decontextualize Islam within the series, but how is Islam itself portrayed, or how is it viewed, or you know, what are people's attitude towards Islam, the religion, within the TV series?
I think what it does, it shows actually the reality that's been there from the time of the Prophet, right? It shows that even when the Prophet died, it wasn't, he left behind a system, a methodology. It didn't mean that everybody bought into it fully or that people were perfect, but people accepted it overall as the system, as a mechanism of how to live in this new way of living in this very diverse sort of environment, right? So therefore what I think Ertugrul shows in that same way is that the Muslim narrative is never singular, right? And there are different influences. Like you might ask, somebody might ask, okay, why are those decadent emirs and sultans, and where's the Khilafah, and where's this, and why are the tribes there? You might ask yourself those questions because we don't understand the times. But there's never been a single trajectory in history. And so you have to understand that we had different kinds of systems of governance, dynasties primarily, which for me is not particularly Islamic, but, you know, we, you know, and how then often the more spiritual people were ousted from the mainstream. Either that you had spiritual leaders who conformed to the ruling elites, or they separated and they were the voice of criticism or the voice of, you know, challenge, right? And maybe they were killed, or maybe they were imprisoned or something like that. So the voice of discontent against the ruling elites was always there. And what you see with Ertugrul, you see him wishing the state to be better, having allegiance to the Seljuks, right? But the Seljuks, you know, messing it up again and again, right? So therefore, or the state messing it up. And so therefore, you know, he had to make a decision. Does he follow the state, and does he then let go of the principles, or does he step back from the state and take the consequences of what that means, and then maybe do something different, do something separate? Which is, in a way, the history. I mean, we don't know the exact history, and the series is a sort of the writer's projection onto the history. It's fiction at the end of the day, right? But we can learn from fiction, so there's no harm in that. So therefore, I think it's showing us, like, for example, for today, we don't have to have a single leader. We don't have to have a single thing that's right. There can be many rights and there can be many wrongs. But what we have to do, the lesson, if we want to follow the principles of our faith at all, is to say, how do we learn to accept the differences amongst us and without killing each other, kind of thing. So this is what I think this series gives us some insights to and makes us think a little bit about it a little bit more.
Okay, awesome. Final point, or maybe two more final points. If you were to pick a historic figure within, the historical breadth of Islam,
yes,
for this kind of treatment, for the Ertugrul treatment,
yes,
who would you pick and why?
To be honest, I'm a typical diasporic Muslim who is not too aware of all the important historical figures.
Which is a shame, isn't
it? So, but of the people I know, in, let's say, outside of the time of the early centuries of Islam, I think I would like to know about Spain. And I would like to know about Timbuktu. In fact, I was only thinking that the other day.
Mansa Musa.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, we look in a very disjointed way. We say, we know it was very rich. We know it was full of gold. We know that there were these great universities, great learning. But it's very disjointed. I'd like to give it. I'd like it to be given the Ertugrul treatment to say, okay, let's see how it was at the time, with some real thought through historical evidence and everything. Let's see how these people lived. How did they evolve? How did they create the civilization? And we can create fictional characters or even real ones. But I would like to see it, visually, to see. Okay, oh right, yeah, I get it. And this is the road it had. And Spain also, not from the point of view of the great rulers of Spain, but I'd like to see. Okay, when Muslims first came to Spain, how did they face the challenges, right? How did they do it? How did they actually manage to establish that sort of civilization that they did? What did they bring with them and what did they take from it? Because usually what happens with our history, we do the easy stuff. Yeah. But I really want to ask the questions, well, how did that happen?
Interesting.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on what TV show do you think, or what person in history do you think should be given the Ertugrul treatment as well? Leave your comments below. So I think that's it.
Great.
So thank you. Any passing words? Any thoughts that maybe you want to share with us about the show?
Well, all I would say is for those who are struggling to get through the long episodes like yourself, it does require commitment. But I think once you get into it, binge watch it. Right, that's my advice, and just get into it because it's really an immersive experience of which then you really gain so much from it. And I think I know so many people who have started watching it and got addicted to it from things I put on Facebook, and they were saying at the beginning, oh, I can't, it's too long and I can't. Then they watched a couple and they put a point, oh, Humera, you got me addicted, I can't watch it, I'm learning so much and I'm learning about the history, I'm learning about everything. So, if you go with an open mind and just work with it and don't impose too much onto it, preconceived ideas, just go with it and you'll enjoy it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for allowing us in your home to film. This has been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah, long time coming.
Well, I wanted to do it, but life and things and everything, so we just didn't get a chance to do it. So thank you very much as well. Guys, make sure you leave your comments below, inshallah. If you haven't as yet subscribed, make sure you subscribe to Wagwan and hit that bell as well so you also get notifications when we upload new videos. So once again, guys, stay tuned to Wagwan!